You're listening to Talk the Talk with Bill Newman and Buzz Eisenberg, WHMP.
Welcome back to Talk the Talk. We are joined by Rich Michelson, of course, the creator, the founder of our Michelson Gallery here in Northampton, a prolific author, a well-known poet, and a regular guest on our show. We really appreciate, Rich Michelson, you're coming into the studio today. Thank you so much. We wanted you to be with us because we wanted our listeners to know about your new book. And we should point out Rich Michelson's children's books are widely acclaimed in addition to his poetry. Rich, tell us about your new book.
Well, thank you, Bill, and it's always nice to be here. I get a chance to talk about myself instead of talking about the other poets I usually bring in.
Or your children.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, we should note for our listeners who don't know that Rich's regular segment is called NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with erstwhile poet laureate Rich Michelson.
Oh, I love that intro. Yes, you should follow me around all the time. So my book, and actually it's a fairly nice segue today, talking about what Jimmy Carter contributed to the world, and this book is called More Than Enough, and it is inspired by Maimonides, the great Jewish rabbi, scientist, philosopher. Many people consider him the greatest Jewish philosopher of all time, certainly of the Middle Ages. And this is a children's book talking about giving charity and creating a fair and just society. Now that sounds like fun, doesn't it? But the book, I think, is fun. It's a way to introduce children to the idea of giving and helping others who are who have less than they have, and it really came about actually through my own travails. Anybody who walks Main Street in Northampton, I often go to Paul and Elizabeth's for lunch, and leaving my gallery and walking the few steps down, I generally passed about 5 people asking for money almost every day. And I started wondering, what's the proper way to deal with that? You see Downtown Dan, who is playing his guitar every day. There's Steve the busker, who's also out there playing his guitar, needing money. And you see the fellow who's raising money for black boys at risk. He flashes very quickly his official government stuff, which I've never read, and I kind of go between belief and disbelief. And right outside my gallery, for the last 4 years, we've seen a woman sitting there with a sign that says, pregnant and homeless.
That's
the longest gestation in human history. And I pass her every day. I see her setting up in the morning, putting her pillow under, under her shirt. And at the end of the day, she takes it out and walks down. And I pass these people every day. And oftentimes I take people to lunch. Clients who are coming in, various artists. And I've enjoyed watching how these people walk past. So one fella I took to lunch not that long ago put $1 in everybody's plate. Another fella chose one person to give $10 to. Somebody else, and this is what started me thinking about how to talk to kids about this, says, I never give money because they're only going to use it on drugs and alcohol. Later that night, I went to a party and saw that same fella, and what was he using his money on? Drugs and alcohol, right? So I started doing some, research, thinking how different people think about it.
Let me ask you, Rich Michelson, what is the target age of the readers of More Than Enough, your new children's book?
Well, I'm always bad about that, but I think it's generally geared to 5 to 10-year-olds. I think adults need to read it too. I think we all are dealing with these questions.
Right, but I remember well with our kids, You're talking about giving.
Right?
I remember teaching the notion of sharing.
Yes.
And that's the word that we use. I suppose it might be the same thing, but the question of sharing, of the reciprocal relationship, the obligations we all have to each other, is kids start off incredibly selfish, me, and they have to learn those skills.
Yeah, right. So I just read it. I had a group from the fifth grade from the Lander Grinspan School come in. The book was just published yesterday, but I had an advance copy. They came in, and it was fascinating to hear the kids talk about their own experiences, what their families do. They're watching their parents walk down the street and seeing how their parents are interacting. And I got an email just yesterday from one of the parents of a child who came and heard me read to say that that since the reading, they have been watching how attuned their child suddenly was to other people on the street, what their needs were, what they should give, and it started a great discussion. And that's really what I want this book to do, to start a discussion among people. There's not necessarily a right answer or wrong answer, but to really talk about it. And I started researching to see what various people had to say about it, talking about the drugs and alcohol. Way back in 1791, the writer Samuel Johnson said, "Why should the poor be denied sweeteners of their existence?" More recently, Pope Francis says, "Give them money, don't worry about it." That's hard for me to do.
In that regard, Rich Michelson, I'd be interested to know your perspective on this, and I'll share my response to a lot of the panhandlers. Leaving aside a lot of the issues, my major response is I wouldn't trade places with that person for anything, whether they're using money for food and shelter or whether they're using it to abuse alcohol. In some ways, to me, doesn't matter as much as the big picture is. I wouldn't want to have that job sitting on the streets of Northampton for anything.
It's the hardest job in the world.
It is. I remember this great scene from Fiddler on the Roof, where during the song Tradition, a beggar is saying, "Alms for the poor, alms for the poor," and the man that he's seeking money from says, "Here's 1 kopek," and the beggar says, "1 kopek. Last week you gave me 2 kopecks." So the man says, "But I had a bad week." He said, "If you had a bad week, why should I suffer?"
Yeah. And and it's great. So one of the things I found and certainly it's been in the news lately. We all know that Elon Musk. There was a headline, right? His nonprofit, which has to give a certain amount of money to the poor, isn't doing it. And of course, Trump, is often promising money when they have to file the papers. You see, in fact, they're not actually living up to their legal obligation. And there's also the question of, when I get from my synagogue, a donor form, you have to check, do you want to do it anonymously or do you want your name on it? Now, the philosopher Peter Singer says you always need to use your name because that changes the culture where instead of a culture of every person for themselves, other people are seeing that you're giving and you are, of course, maybe then causing them to give. And, of course, we can go back to Jesus Christ who said, never trumpet what you're doing. That's hypocritical. So
how do you articulate to children in your book, More Than Enough, this balance that we're talking about?
So this is exactly what I want to do in this. So the person I felt who best covered this was, going back, Maimonides, over 800 years ago. So it's not a new problem. And we tend to think of charity, we pat ourselves on the back. If we give charity, we're doing something we think is right. Maimonides had a different view of what's called tzedakah in the Jewish religion. It wasn't a matter of charity. It was a matter of creating a fair society. And in fact, he would always say that we should thank the poor person for giving us the option, giving us an opportunity to do something good, as opposed to looking for thanks ourselves. That we should understand that if circumstances were slightly different, we might be the person in need, and the person in need might be in our position. And what he set up was a very specific goal called the golden ladder. And I found that really resonated with me. And what Maimonides set up was 8 steps of the ladder. So that the first step, just to give you an idea, is when you give, but you give unhappily and not as much as you should. That's usually where I fall in life. My wife.
Tell us about the highest rung.
So it goes from the first rung to giving happily, but less than you should, giving, anonymously, giving with things. And the highest rung is when you create a job or hire someone who's on the street so that they can then earn money to be able to give charity to others.
And they earn respect.
And earn respect. So what I've tried to do in my book, now we can put all that aside for children, is very simple. I bring a child through a year. His family's poor. His father wants to open a store. But it's his 6th birthday. And they've saved up, and they give him a bunch of quarters. And he's going to buy new sneakers for the first time in his life. And on the way to the store, they pass somebody begging. So his mother pats his noisy pocket with the jingle jangle of coins. There's somebody without shoes at all. Does he want to get new sneakers, or maybe used sneakers, and I'll have to give some to somebody? He's not very happy. He gives a little bit. And then he sees the consequences of his actions. And we can talk about that.
And indeed we will. We are speaking with Rich Michelson, who's written a new book, More Than Enough. We'll be right back.
This is Talk the Talk with Bill Newman and Buzz Eisenberg. You're listening to Talk the Talk with Bill Newman and Buzz Eisenberg, WHMP.
We are continuing our conversation with Rich Michelson. Bill, you were talking about the rungs of the ladder when we were off the air.
Well, Rich Michelson's book, and I'd like to, answering this question, Rich, if you would give us 15 seconds on the overview, what the story is and what ages the book is intended to. But my question for you that I'd like you to share, because we were talking just before we were off air for a minute or two, which is the ladders, the hierarchy of goodness involved in giving. And you had in particular referenced Maimonides, the great Jewish philosopher. Tell us about some of the higher rungs, if you would, please.
Sure. Well, what Maimonides wanted to do was remove shame from the interaction, and also remove pride from the interaction. So, because you shouldn't congratulate yourself. This is basic human decency, This, there's various steps as you go up. In my book, the boy finally puts some money in a guitar case for someone, and later he's all upset because the guitar player doesn't acknowledge the thanks. He doesn't understand that there was shame involved in a little boy giving money to them. By the same token, so Maimonides says, as you're going up the ladder, you give anonymously, or you give to somebody who doesn't know where it's coming from. So if you happen to pass them in the street, they don't feel that they need shameful or that they owe you gratitude, and you don't know who you gave to, so you can't go around all puffed up with yourself. So in the book, what happens is the boy, in over a year, kind of runs through the different rungs of the ladder, but it's got, but it's a very soft. Nothing's hammered home. There are no right answers. We go up the ladder, we go down the ladder. We all have different things. Why don't I just read you the beginning to give you a sense of the book. And I also want to mention it's beautifully illustrated by Joe Cepeda, who's one of the country's top illustrators. And I named the boy in my book after Moses Maimonides, so his name is Moses. And I've found, to my surprise, how many young children are named Moses in this day and age. When I was growing up, I didn't know a single Moses, but they're out there. Moses isn't used to jingle jangle in his pocket, but today he turned 6, so Pops slipped him 12 quarters. Hooray, Moses cheers. But I thought we were saving every penny for you to open your own shop someday. It's okay. Pops gives Moses a hug. You can save some, spend some, and give some away. Now Mom is taking Moses for high tops, his first brand new pair. Outside, the city streets are sprinkled with snow. Barefoot Benny clink-clanks his cup of change. Moses frowns and looks away. Moses pretends not to hear. So we see Moses very reluctantly giving up. We also see Barefoot Benny months later, how he has benefited from everybody in town giving a little bit. As the mother says, a little bit can change a life if enough people pitch in. And she also explains that while Moses is looking for new shoes, Barefoot Benny is looking for any shoes at all. So we take him through the story. We see what happens with Moses and his friends as they go through a full year. We see them at Christmas time working in a soup kitchen. We see his dad. So I think it'll really spark discussions, I hope, in your family. I think kids also, from what I've seen, love the story. It's fun to watch Moses go through life.
The book is More Than Enough by Rich Michelson. Where can people get the book?
Well, we have it in my gallery. I don't know if they have it yet in the Broadside, Odyssey, Amherst books, because it's just yesterday, but hopefully they'll get it in. You can get it at the evil Amazon, of course. If you do, as penitence, I make you write a review.
Make you give some money.
So it goes up on the algorithms. Any local bookstore, it's all over the country. And check it out at your local library as well.
And the book is called More Than Enough. Rich Michelson, thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us today.